Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I want to introduce you to a very brilliant individual in the development business and the architecture business, Sami Kazemi. He's a principal at BDP Quadrangle. I read a really interesting post that he made about intensification and redevelopment of malls around a Greater Toronto area, and that might be one of the solutions to our housing crisis that we're facing in Southern Ontario, the Greater Toronto area. But an individual that's also been very involved in the delivery of major master planned and mixed use developments around the Greater Toronto area. And so I thought it'd be really helpful to check in with him because, housing affordability, the housing crisis, the lack of housing supply has been an issue that we've talked about on this show and on numerous different shows and in politics quite a bit in the last little while. So, Sami, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian, for having me.
So, let's start out with mall intensification. We can go to some other issues as well, but to tell us about why mall intensification, development on parking lots around malls, makes potentially some sense.
Well, I guess if you zoom out and just talk about retail in general, obviously retail has been going through a number of disruptions. It's been disrupted already. It's been decades in the making, and it's really about the change of consumer behavior. Uh, Obviously, online shopping is a big factor, but it's not the only factor. Online behavior has been changing around what they are looking for in a retail environment and what their expectations are when they go to the mall. So there is this shift towards experiential retail. There is this shift and desire for more mixed use developments. Uh, and really, all of these factors make the shopping mall a prime target for reinvention and looking at it with fresh eyes and seeing whether it could be part of the solution to the housing crisis that we've got.
Just this past week, I drove by Cloverdale on the 427, and there's hardly anyone in the parking lot. And I understand that there's proposals to convert that into, I think it's like 24 or something like that, different buildings. It's a massive potential development. And then I also drove by Yorkdale. And Yorkdale, the parking lot was jam-packed full, like unbelievable. And yet there's also a proposal to build a whole bunch of buildings there. So, I see how it might make sense at Cloverdale, where maybe it's a secondary mall and there's a lot of development potential on a parking lot that's empty. But why would it make sense at Yorkdale, where the parking lot's jam-packed full?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes people conflate things and think that all these redevelopment sites are created equal. They're not. Malls are not created equals. Some are doing great despite all of the disruptions that are happening in the retail industries. Some are doing absolutely great, and some are frankly struggling. So the intervention and the architectural solutions for these are not the same. But a lot of them, at least in the GTA, what they all have in common is they're designed as an island surrounded by a sea of surface parking. And we know that that sea of surface parking is not the highest and best use. It's not the best environment for today's users. And that offers a really great opportunities. We know that these centers and a lot of these malls are very well located because they picked a location that's really well served. A lot of them are accessible. There's a lot of infrastructure projects. There's a lot of transit projects happening in close proximity to this. So there's a lot of investment in public transit and other infrastructure, which justifies adding density and for landowners to essentially unlock this potential that is embedded in these sites. But the solutions are very different. It doesn't mean that we're replacing these malls. There are some that are being replaced, but a lot of them aren't. A lot of them, it's really about improving the malls, and some of them are actually getting additions to that retail space. But what you're also doing is you're adding hundreds, if not thousands, in some locations of additional residential units, and of course that adds a lot of foot traffic to those malls. So it's a good cycle where things improve over time, where you get more people coming to the retail. The retail hopefully thrives as a result of this as well.
I understand there's something like 10 to 30,000 condo units that are unsold. And I think the numbers differ on whether it's existing condos that have been built or condos that have been built and are coming on stream this year. With that kind of surplus condominium inventory, Do we have a housing crisis?
Uh, yeah, it's very interesting looking at it from different perspectives. First of all, the this trend is very new. The trend of condo units not doing well, but the fundamentals are there. The fundamentals are just purely by the numbers. There is a housing crisis because people need places to be, and the fact that they're not affordable is independent of the fact that they are needed. So once the equilibrium comes back again and things settle and there is a balance between supply and demand and the pricing, uh, that will correct itself hopefully, and we will see that demand come back again.
So you think that prices have got to come down, such that
I'm not an economist, so I won't venture into speculating on prices. My specialization is designing these new communities so that they're livable, so that they are active places and adding value to our clients. In terms of prices, I'll defer to the economist that you'll hopefully interview in the future.
okay, so some people think that prices have got to come down. We'll leave it at that. But what about the layout, the size of the units? You're an architect. You've designed these buildings and these developments. Some of the criticism in the past, and the reason why we've got all these condos, is that too many of the condos were purchased by investors, and they've been described as, shoe boxes, that they're way too small. Do you think we need to have more larger sized units and maybe even 2 and 3 bedroom units? Because the vast majority, I understand, like 75% of them could be bachelors or 1 bedrooms. Do we need bigger units with more rooms?
Uh, yeah, I mean, absolutely. We need to normalize families living in higher density environments, and for us to encourage families to live there, just like a lot of first-class cities all around the world. Those units need to be uh, desirable for families, and a big factor, of course, is size. And we can't continue to build only the smaller units. Having said that, the smaller units do play a real factor in terms of an entry point for people to enter into the real estate market, to go up that ladder and to build equity. It is an opportunity for people of different means to be investors in the market as well, and not just rely on the larger investors. So there are benefits, but it's really about reaching that right equilibrium and that right balance. But absolutely, building units that are uh, usable for families is fundamental. And we're looking at that from different perspectives. One of it is obviously the size and how we can design larger units, but still make it affordable from a constructability and construction cost perspective. Another one is the efficiency of the units and how we can improve their usability, things like transformable furniture and things of that nature. And another one is really just observing what do they use in those spaces and what kind of amenities can we give them so that they don't need to have those amenities within their units. So there isn't a one size fits all solution to this. But the problem is very well defined. It is that we can't continue to just be building for the smallest units and really just for the transient end user and the investor that is targeting that transient end user. Because for these developments to become true communities, you need longevity. You need people to live there for a long time, call it their home, build a family there, and therefore those communities really thrive.
You described 3 ways that we can redevelop these sites. One would be, get rid of the mall and build from a blank slate. The second would be building around a successful mall just in the parking lot. And the third was building on top of the mall. Can you give us an example of where something has been built on top and describe that? How would that actually happen?
Yeah, I mean, one example of that is the Young and Shepherd Center that we designed in Uppertown, Toronto. That really applies to a lot of the smaller shopping centers that are located in prime real estate, close to transit, and they're doing really well. But the airspace, if you can call it that, it's really the space above it is not being used to its full potential. So there are a lot of opportunities there to build on top of these structures while maintaining their viability. That's not really the low-hanging fruit because, to be honest, in the GTA, that's not where the majority of the retail centers are. The majority of the retail centers are, again, this island in a sea of surface parking. So the amount of parking that is usually designed for these malls is oversupplied because they're designing for the worst case scenario. It's for, the day before Christmas. It's for that number of people all coming in at the same time. But every other day of the year, you're really not justified in a prime location like this to have just parking. And that's where it's really the low-hanging fruit. Intensifications around these surface lots is a win-win, because what you're doing is you're not only improving the viability of the area as a whole, you're creating community more. You can actually extend the retail, extend it closer to the streets. You can still provide all the required parking internally. You can provide it below grade or above grade, but internalized to that site and with buildings on top of it, as opposed to this approach of it being just single use. In today's world, with the lack of resources, it's not justifiable to have single use within prime real estate. It really doesn't make any sense. That's an old way of doing things, and it's not the way that new demographics and new communities want. They want the mixed use. They want an environment that really serves them, that is vibrant. You've heard the term 15-minute city, and the idea that things are walkable, that you can walk to the grocery store, you can walk to the coffee shop, you can walk to transit. Everything is within close proximity. That's really what attracts people to downtowns, but it doesn't need to be just in the downtowns. That principle could be achieved in a lot of the outside of the core areas as well. And over there, we have more opportunities because we're not confined with the existing conditions. We can create something actually better, even because we're not confined. We've got the infrastructure, we've got the wider streets. We can start to create a much better environment there.
So you think that with some of these malls, they'll still have the same amount of parking as they currently do? It'll just be what, underground or above ground, not surface parking?
No, I wouldn't say they would have the same amount of parking, and this comes to speculation. As an architect, we need to design for maximum flexibility. So what we do is these projects really evolve over a 20-year period of time. They don't get overbuilt overnight. So what we look at them as phased developments. So we start by looking at what is phase one, where is the location with the least impact on parking, least impact on views. That's where you start building it. And as you start developing more and more, and maybe in phase one, you replace all the parking that you've lost, because today people are using the same amount of cars. We know that dependency on cars, and with the future, who knows where things are going with autonomous driving and other factors. We know that the trends, generally speaking, with the new demographics and the new generation, is less reliance on driving. There's also more infrastructure in transit happening all around. And that also, over time, once hopefully these projects actually get built, we do have a problem with actually getting them built and getting them operational. But once they are, over time, that should reduce the reliance on the single-use automotive. And that would reduce the amount of parking. We see it already where there were a number of high-rise residential buildings that were built in the past with a large requirement for parking, and we see that the parking is half empty. That is already happening in the city right now. Not everywhere, but it is happening. So the trends will most likely be in that direction. So when we design it for maximum flexibility. So over time, as you start adding more and more developments, you can adjust. You can monitor and adjust, and it's always data-driven. Every single project and every phase has to be supported by a very vigorous and very robust traffic analysis that analyzes what the usage is today and where they anticipate it to go. And you have to design for the situation today. So every phase, if another phase comes in 3 years and 5 years, you reassess the situation and you assess whether you actually need all this parking or whether you can keep reducing it. So it's really not parking for some reason in the city, or maybe it's for well-known reasons, becomes a very emotional item, and people get very um, they have very strong, almost dogmatic opinions about it. But the reality is, as architects and planners and traffic engineers, we just go where the data tells us, and we just rely on the data, and we build based on that, and not based on any dogmatic assumptions about, oh, people don't want to drive or people want to drive. You really need to follow the data there.
Well, and you also need to have the infrastructure of the alternatives. I've
Absolutely.
heard that Yorkdale, as an example, gets something like 25 or more percentage of all their traffic from subway, and it's because the subway station's right there. And if you didn't have a subway station right there, obviously you might not be able to get that amount of demand. And so therefore, thinking about which malls deserve this substantial intensification, one's got to consider whether there's transit. I understand that the people that are redeveloping Cloverdale on the 427 are actually trying to persuade the province to extend the subway along that rail track that just goes right south of Cloverdale, and get another subway station west of Kipling. And one can imagine that Cloverdale development would be far more conducive to less parking and less car orientation if there was another subway stop or even a GO train stop, because that track is just there south of Dundas. We're going to take a break.
And just to that point, sorry to interrupt, Brian, but it's always very interesting. It's always the chicken and egg scenario when politicians debate this endlessly with in community meetings. We see this debate play in real time all the time. Which one comes first? Do you get the transit first, or do you get the density first? And the reality is you need both. And because both of them take a very long time, it's really about incremental growth. You need to have a plan in place, and you need to follow it with transit, and density needs to follow suit as well. But they need to go hand in hand. You can't really speed one ahead of the other, because then there's failure. If you put all this density and there isn't enough infrastructure, you're going to get a lot of the mistakes that have happened in Toronto, where there was a lot of high density in certain locations that transit wasn't there, and vice versa. There are areas that are very well served by transit that are actually don't have the numbers there to justify all those dollars, taxpayer dollars, that were invested in there.
We're chatting tonight with Sami Kazemi of BDP Quadrangle. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back, and we're going to talk about why malls have this sort of image in our minds, is sort of the town squares of today that was the equivalent of the sort of the main and main in the past. And Sami's worked on some of these redevelopments that have really tried to create this live, work, mixed use environment. We're going to ask him a little bit about that and how we actually create that. He's described it as social capital and community feel. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight with an architect who's been involved in some of these mall intensification projects, and also, I think, and we're going to chat about this, the creation of some new areas that really are a combination of retail and office and residential, and a mixed use live-work kind of environment. His name is Sami Kazemi. He's a principal at BDP Quadrangle, and something called and he's joined that in 2010. And he leads the delivery of major master planned and mixed use developments, including, as I said, taking the lead on some of the mall conversion projects taking place around the Greater Toronto area. Sami, I want to ask you a little bit about, if we could take a step back, malls, because they've got really a sort of an image in our mind of sort of a special downtown place or town hall place. And you talk a little bit about the Disneyfication of these malls. Tell me a little bit about why malls have this image for us.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I will confess that I wasn't aware of this emotional attachment to malls until I started working on redevelopment of malls. And as you know, in the GTA, if you're working on any development project, there's a heavy community engagement process that goes through, and we have to talk to the community. We get to know them really well. We get to know their concerns, and they, of course, are very vocal, and they do have a lot of concerns. But the one thing that surprised me, that's different from other development projects that we've worked on, is the emotional attachment that a lot of community, and especially people that have been living, the folks that have been living in these communities for a long time, is they really consider them as a social hub. They don't consider them as just a place where you go and you buy things and you leave. And you can see this with certain demographics, seniors, even the younger people, the teenagers, and or parents of teenagers that talk about that as well. And that takes you back to the history of the mall and why it was created the way it was, because it was actually, when it was first created, it was always envisioned at that social hub. In a way, it's a North American, the malls the way we have them here in North America are an invention really as a result of the suburban sprawl that was created in the 1960s and 70s. And they were really their answer to the European piazza, where social life happens. And as a substitute for that, because that doesn't exist in in the suburbs of North America, they invented the mall as an internal place where not only can you come and shop, but you can come and meet people and really see people and be seen. That along with all the nostalgia that comes with malls, because people have spent a lot of times with over there, created a lot of this social capital. Some of those malls are not acting that way anymore, but there is still a strong nostalgia. And what's interesting is malls that acted this way as a social hub did really well commercially as well. Ones that perhaps didn't do as well commercially. So there's a lot of factors involved there. And even malls that are considered dead malls, and that's a term that is used, thankfully, not as much in Canada, but you hear it a lot in the US because they've got way more malls than we do over here. They're dead from a commercial viability perspective, but they're not necessarily dead from a social capital that they have, and they're definitely not dead in terms of the value of their locations. So there are a lot of opportunities there, and maybe it's more than an opportunity, it's a duty for us as designers, as well as my clients and developers that we're working on these projects, is that if we're making any change to these malls, it has to be to get something actually better. So looking at if the mall was acting as a social hub, any new development and intensification has to recreate that in a new way that is desirable. And that's where mixed use comes along. When you're adding a lot of residential units, you're adding some commercial spaces, you're adding that mix of spaces, you're making it very vibrant, and you're adding more people into that location as well. So there are a lot of opportunities, but there's also a responsibility for us to continue to maintain that social hub aspect of the malls.
You described this Disneyfication of malls. What do you mean by the Disneyfication of malls, and is that good or bad?
Yeah, I mean it's I won't say good or bad because I tend not to talk in those terms, but it is absolutely true. I mean, you can see it probably a lot more in the US where you go into a mall somewhere in a location where it's snowing outside and you go inside and it's like a tropical forest and you've got these plastic palm trees in the middle and these fountains, and they're trying to transform you somewhere that is not really where you are. So you're always, malls have tried to do that, and that's what I mean by Disneyfication, where it's not necessarily a real place. It's trying to mimic what, a piazza in Rome would look like, but you're not in Rome. You're in somewhere in the suburbs and in air-conditioned space inside a mall, somewhere that's very commercial. It's not fully public. It's only semi-public. So it's a very different environment. Uh, and what we're hoping with a lot of these redesigns and reinvention of these spaces is when we're redesigning it with a mixed-use environment, we're creating hopefully something better than Disneyfication. We're creating a real space that is of its place and can create a sense of community there.
Give me an example of a real space versus a Disneyfication space, if you could.
Uh, that's I mean, you're getting me in trouble because a lot of these owners are my clients. But I would just say that there are a lot of examples of main streets, and really main streets are what I would call real places because you've got a lot of diversification. It's a public space, and it belongs to in every town and every neighborhood. There's a little bit of a main street, and that's a real place where if you go into some malls, you can see that, let's just call it the plastic palm trees. That's where it doesn't
So
feel
get rid
real.
of the plastic palm trees. Okay, that's
Yeah.
so what would you tell a community if you had a community meeting and they said, we don't want to lose our mall. We're attached to it. What would you tell people?
I mean, thankfully, most of the projects that we're working on, the malls are not being lost and they are actually being enhanced in a way. But the reality is there are certain locations where the malls are not doing well. And as a result, because of all the pressures on land prices and development factors, they are looking at redevelopment, and sometimes it's a reduction of the total amount of retail. It's almost never removing all the retail. It's really just about right sizing the amount of retail that could serve that community. Um, so it's really we're coming at it always trying to create something better. And that really starts by listening to the community and understanding what is that space and how do they what is it used for. So we've worked on a number of development plans for malls, Scarborough Town Centre. We've worked on Dufferin Mall, and Jane and Finch was a very interesting one where the community had a very unique perspective on that mall and how they perceive it and how they use it. So we really had to understand how they use it. And we needed to create these new public spaces. So our plan includes new public spaces, both indoor and outdoor spaces, that mimic what was there before and what it was used there before. But we think it's actually an improvement over what is there today because we're taking those spaces that were essentially surface parking spaces that were used as a community space and formalizing that into a real plaza that could be used for public space, that could be programmed, and it could be programmed throughout the year and throughout the days for the different events and the different uses that the community uses it. So it really comes down to it. The first step is to listen closely to the community and what they're saying and take what they're saying seriously.
You referenced the 3Ds. What are the 3Ds and why do they matter?
Yeah, so when we're designing, we think of density, diversity, and design. So when it comes to density, really, in order for any thriving community to happen, you need a little bit of density. And there's a lot of discussions about what is the right amount of density. You hear in community meetings, a lot of people complaining about, is it too dense? And absolutely, there is a limit. There is no such thing as it cannot be too dense. It's all about what is the infrastructure, what is the capabilities of within that area. But the facts of the matter is you need density in order for a development and a community to be thriving and to be active. And for the retail to survive, you need density. You need foot traffic, and foot traffic comes from that density. So that's really important. Diversity is something that we try to implement at different levels, and I know that this word carries a lot of connotations and a lot of different meanings, but the way that we apply it is really diversity of built form and diversity of who we're serving. So built form means that we're not creating all high rises, all the same size, all the same shape, all the same units, and creating this really just bland repetition of the same units, the same heights, the same building typology, the same architectural expression. You need diversity in order to create something vibrant. So you're creating the mid-rise, the high-rise, the different buildings of different typologies. You're creating units of different sizes. You're creating different types of retail. The big box has a place, and the smaller retail stores for the mom and pop shops all have a place within a mixed use development. So you need that diversity. And you need to design it in a way that it can evolve over time, because we can't predict what the world will be like in 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So when we're, as architects, when we're designing, we're always designing for flexibility. We want it to be a certain way today, based on what we know today, but we want to design it in a way that allows for ultimate flexibility. I'll just give you an example of that. You mentioned parking. One of the things we're looking at in some of our newer developments is designing where we have above grade parking. We design the above grade parking structure in a way that allows it to get converted into something else in the future. So that involves designing certain things of how the structural system works, how the mechanical electrical systems work, even the floor to floor heights, the slopes of the floors. A lot of things we design it in a certain way that today there is a requirement for parking. We know there is a demand for a certain number of parking spaces. If where we think things are going, there won't be that in the future. Today, there's not as much demand for office space, but that could change in the coming decades, coming years. So we design above grade parking that it could be converted after a while. You can change the cladding on it, add some of the mechanical equipment, and you've got an office space, or you've got a big box retail store, or you've got a number of other uses that could be used for it. So that's part of this idea of diversity, that you're designing for things that could be adaptable for the future. And then design is just really that at the end of the day, humans, even though we all have different appreciation of what is good design and we have different tastes, I'm a believer that when you know it when you see it, and if something is designed well, most people agree that it is designed well. And design is not just the aesthetics and what it looks like, but how it functions, of course. So that's as designers, that's really something we all aspire to do.
We're chatting tonight with Sami Kazemi. He is a principal at BDP Quadrangle. He's been involved in the redevelopment of some malls and also some mixed-use developments in around the Greater Toronto area. We're going to come back after a quick break for some messages. And I'm going to ask Sami how you create this sense of place, how you create this community, this mixed-use development that people want to live in and work in. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight with Sami Kazemi, a principal at BDP Quadrangle, about our housing crisis and about some solutions to our housing crisis. Sami, I understand that you were very involved in the development and master planning for downtown Markham. And you also said that mixed-use development is sort of the natural state of development. But it seems like for the last, I don't know, 50 years, we've actually gone away from that, where we've tried to have employment zones and retail zones and residential zones that are all and industrial zones that are all very distinct from one another. And you were involved in this redevelopment or development of this new downtown for Markham. And you've got, a couple of examples right near of the village of Markham and the village of Unionville that really are those mixed-use developments that had retail, that had commercial, that had residential, and it had a sense of place. The Unionville Festival, and events that happen on the main drag in both Unionville and Markham are quite nice. And yet you built a brand new downtown. How'd you do that?
Yeah, I mean, just back to the mixed use and why I'm saying it's the natural state of things. I mean, if you zoom out and just take a much larger historical sense, for thousands of years, humans, before the invention of professional planners and professional architects like myself, really things were designed somewhat intuitively, and some might say even haphazardly, but really it was done really well. And it was always about mixed use, because that's what people wanted. They wanted to live, you would live upstairs and you'd have your shop downstairs. You'd walk outside and you've got all the commerce, all the retail is over there, and you've got your and everything is compact and everything is in close proximity. And that's how all cities were designed for essentially thousands of years. And then more recently, really post-World War II, there was this new idea of segregating things and separating uses. So you have an office campus, you've got your your retail is separate and your neighborhood, your bedroom community is somewhere else. Uh, and for all intended purposes, that has not been a success, and it's created um, a lot of the problems that we're seeing today in terms of congestion, long travel times, obviously the environmental aspect of this. The list goes on. Even the health crisis that we're having with people not eating well and not getting enough exercise. It really carries a lot of. There's a lot of layers to this. So really all we're doing is going back to something that we've known all along. We know intuitively that people want to live in this mixed use neighborhoods. You know that because really even real estate prices reflect that. You can see it where some of the most successful neighborhoods that are the most expensive are those walkable mixed use neighborhoods. Creating that from scratch is never easy. It's not easy because these neighborhoods developed over a long period of time and they develop incrementally. So as designers to create this uh, in a location that didn't have that, where you don't have those existing heritage buildings and those existing community already in place, means that we need to almost reverse engineer things. We need to think about how are we doing this and how do we do it over a long period of time. So for example, downtown Markham, it was very important that as soon as our clients started putting some of the residential units there, they invested very heavily in a lot of retail and some key attractions. And that, and in the case of downtown Markham, it was this large mixed-use development that had office space, it had a cinema, it had a lot of retail. And in addition, across the street, we designed a hotel and condo as well. So we started building these anchor points that create that sense so that when the residential unit starts coming in and there's more density, there's already a sense of place there. There's already an anchor there that you can point to and say, yeah, that's the downtown. So it's really about the chicken and egg. Which one do you start first? You need to have some investment and invest in the commercial aspect of things that create that sense. Um, the public plazas, again, downtown Markham, we created this plaza. It's actually a carousel art piece that has this large plaza associated with it as well. And that was just a piece of public space infrastructure for this community. And the community is still it's not complete yet. There are more and more buildings coming in, but as they come in, as more folks move into the neighborhood, hopefully they will start populating it, make it their own, things start changing. Because what makes a neighborhood and a downtown um, really thrive is that people make it their own. They make changes over time. So as architects, when we design spaces, we have to design them with that in mind. So as an example, I mentioned the above grade parking, but there's also the way we design retail. We allow for retail to evolve over time. Maybe there's a market now for bigger retail, but we design in a way that allows for smaller retail. We allow maybe for retail on the second floor where now there's no market for second floor retail. Maybe in a location where the retail doesn't exist today, we put some residential amenity, but we design it so it could be converted to retail in the future. So we allow that to evolve over time because that's really important. It's not enough. Uh, Architects and city planners that claim that they know where the future is going and they're designing something to be very static I think are making a mistake. Things have to be designed for flexibility because you need the community to make the decisions and change things over time.
How important was having the all-day two-way go service to that area?
Yeah, absolutely. It's again designing for with transit in mind. For it to be a thriving community, you need to be able to commute to it, commute out of it. So it's really again the transit and the developments really have to go hand in hand, and this is where the private and the public sector need to work together on this and develop the plans of where all of our money needs to go in terms of improving transit.
I'm not sure if you'd agree, but my sense is that downtown Markham feels like a town. There's a center to it. There's a sense of place to it. The Vaughan Metro Center, the end of the subway at Jane and 7, to me doesn't. It's just a bunch of high condos right at the end of a subway. Um, what's the difference?
Uh, Yeah, I mean, I would just say that I wouldn't venture making generalizations until you give it a little bit more time. The examples that a lot of people had said in the past is, for example, City Place, downtown Toronto. City Place was a place that almost everybody would say anecdotally, it has no sense of place. It's a place with very transient, small units, and people don't consider this their home, and it's all renters and there was a lot associated with that. If you see it now, you might actually, and if you speak to the people that live there, and with time, it has evolved over time, and with a lot of more um, community spaces that have started to pop up there, you start talking to the people and you start seeing what's on the ground. You actually start to see more families with kids living there. You start to see more active places there. You start to see a sense of community. So I would say sometimes it's premature to to say that that place hasn't been successful because it takes a little bit of time for it to succeed. Having said that, I think the biggest difference between those two examples that you mentioned is retail. Retail is what drives people to be out on the sidewalks, going about, moving around, and seeing people outside and being outside is really what creates that sense, starts to create that sense of community. If all you're doing is you live in a high rise and you come downstairs to your underground, take your car and leave and never walk around the neighborhood, then you're going to get that sense of these really bedroom communities where it's just people leave and then come back and you're spending all your time indoors. Uh, and bringing in the commercial aspects is really probably the biggest driver to this. And sometimes, to be honest, that takes a developer to make a commitment and to put their money where their mouth is because they need to actually make an investment. Sometimes it's not the highest and best use. Sometimes it's not where you can make the most money. But if you're looking at creating a thriving community, these ingredients are needed, and retail, and especially small format retail, not necessarily the big box retail. Big box has a place, and it's very useful, and people like it. But it's the smaller retail that activates the sidewalks. And at the end of the day, it's the sidewalks. How active they are is probably the best indication of how active a community is.
How active the sidewalks are. That's fascinating. I understand you're also involved in the redevelopment of Scarborough Town Center. There's 16,000 units being planned for the parking lot of Scarborough Town Center, and yet you're keeping the existing mall. How are you going to create that town-like feel, that sense of place, that people on the sidewalk, if you've got 16,000 units in a parking lot surrounding Scarborough Town Center?
Yeah, first of all, it is an 80-acre site, just to give you a sense of the massiveness of that parking, surface parking area over there. That's a very unique site. It's very different from the others because it's acted as a civic hub for Scarborough for a very long time. It's got 250 stores, 20 million annual shoppers. It is extremely successful mall, and people really love it. So there's absolutely a responsibility for us. Anything we design will improve it. When we're talking about 16,000 new housing units, that's over decades. This won't happen overnight. This happens over decades. All we can do is design a framework for that to develop. That can happen over time in so many different ways. So when we start to do the plans for this, we start to think of, okay, where are the public roads going to be? Because where you have public roads, you have public sidewalks, and that's that becomes the spine or the network for everything. And then where do public parks go? Because for a development this size, you need public parks. Where are the best locations for parks? Which developments will be housing? Which developments will be other uses? Of course, there's a lot of mixed use, but where do we want the most height? And most importantly, when we look at this, we start thinking of character areas. So on large sites, when you're planning it, you think of it almost as districts. So in that case, we thought, okay, this district is more of the shopping district. It's still mixed use, but it has more of that double-sided retail on both sides of the street. Another one is more the neighborhood. So you've got townhouses on the ground floor, where you've got fast-moving traffic. Maybe you don't put retail on streets that are meant for cars to be traveling at high speeds, because you're not going to have a lot of people moving there. So it's all about creating those districts and that framework. But the actual buildings, the actual developments happen over a very long period of time. We have one over there that will hopefully break ground soon. But all of the others, really, they come over years and even decades. So again, it's about creating a framework, but then it's flexible. You learn and you reassess what's the situation, how's traffic functioning, what are traffic demands, what are the retail demands, what are the demands for the sizes of the units, the unit mix, and every time you're designing a new building, you adjust those parameters. As long as the framework is there and it's designed, it's there to establish these character areas, but it has flexibility, then it's good. Then you can adapt and change over time.
You've used a couple of terms a few times. Community is one, social capital is another, sense of place is another. Can you explain to me what those are, why they're important, and how you as an architect try to create them?
Yeah, I think those are the kind of terms that you know it when you see it, and it could be it's those terms that can lose their meaning if people use them, as an excuse to do certain things. But uh, you're part of a community when you are part of a community, and you're not when you're not. What we're trying to do is recreate this, or reverse engineer that when we're designing, and that is very difficult because you don't know whether you've been successful or not. Sometimes for years and years to come, even after the project's complete, you still have to wait and see whether that sense of community happens or not. So the best thing we can do is just look at lessons learned and mistakes made by others. And we look at other cities and other places in the world, and we see where it's been successful and where it hasn't. And even in Toronto, of course, we look at all of the mistakes that were done and all the corrections that we're doing. Things like Regent's Park comes to mind, and the mistakes that were done at the time. It was very interesting to see the promotional material that were done for Regent's Park when it was initially created, and the vision for it, and yet how it ended up. The vision for it was all about creating community, and it was all about creating these very large blocks with no cars coming in, so that they're more pedestrian, and you've got these, what they called them, uh, towers in the park. So you've got large parkland and these towers in the middle of them. St. Jamestown is the same idea. And that, obviously, we all know very well that idea of,
Didn't
of
work.
creating those didn't work very well. Actually bringing public streets through those spaces and having people uh, actually commute through spaces and making it more porous, that's a word that we use a lot. Making these development more porous actually works to their advantage. If you start making them internal looking and not open up to the larger community, it doesn't work very well. So those are the kind of lessons learned that we learn from previous mistakes, and we try to improve over time. So it's really just studying what has been done in the past, where has it been successful, and again, as an example, you've got the contrast between Regent's Park and St. Lawrence Market, for example, where it was an extremely much more successful case. Obviously, it's an oversimplification to say that it's just planning and architecture that is the difference between the two. There's a lot of other socioeconomic and other aspects that have to do and perhaps have a bigger impact on what this makes for a successful community or not. But you see St. Lawrence Market the way it was designed, and it's really part of the city. You see also a lot more diversity in the built form over there compared to Regent Park, where all the buildings were very similar and it was similar typology. And of course, you see diversification in the fact that you had both private and public in one, where it was all just affordable, and public in the other. So the more diversity you build into a project and the more porous you make it, the more open you make it, the more you allow for things like retail and things like commercial spaces and public spaces, the more you higher, the higher the chances are of creating that community and sense of place. Nobody can guarantee it will be created, but all we can do is we plant the seeds for it, and we plant the seeds for that to happen, and hope for the best. And if you design with flexibility in mind, then you can adjust and make changes along the way.
Sami, I really enjoyed your article about mall intensification, and I appreciate you coming on and describing it in greater detail. And I hope that you're successful. I think that I had Joe Barrage from Urban Strategies on, and he had some pictures of Dundas Street, both east and west of sort of central Toronto and Kingston Road, and described it as some of the worst development and planning that we've seen. And if you're successful in creating the downtown Markham feel in other mall parking lots, I think that Toronto will be a far better place with a lot more community and social capital. So I really appreciate your design expertise and joining us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videos go on podcast servers, social media, my YouTube channel, and briancrombie.com as soon as the radio show goes to air. I have to say that I think that, it's one of these strange things that smart guys like Sami, a generation ago may have created some of these problems that we have. So hopefully, we do a better job today. And these big parking lots, the separation and zoning of employment from retail, from residential, sort of hasn't worked. And Jane Jacobs in The Life and Death of Great American Cities wrote back in the 1960s that the best places are organically developed. So I hope that these planners and developers and architects actually plan mixed-use developments in a far better way today than they have in the past. And given what Sami said, I think he will. Thank you, everyone. Good night.